Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. On the week of the anniversary of Tahrir Square, that's a January 25th revolution, I'm in conversation with Professor Seif Da'na. He's professor of sociology and international studies at the University of Wisconsin Parkside. Thank you so much for joining me, Seif.
Thank you.
So, Seif, the attack on the activist, which has really taken off in social media, one is reminded that the original Tahrir Square January 25th revolution got its life also through the social media. Do you think there's any possibility that this might re-spark that movement?
Well, essentially, we have currently a situation that is unstable. There is no stability in Egypt at this point, and which basically means that it's not over yet in Egypt. We've seen 4 regimes in the last 4 years, and that basically signify that we don't have stability. None of the regimes were able to solve or deal with the major issues that people were demanding. Currently, the current regime was, to some extent, very popular at the beginning, given the mistakes that were done by the Muslim Brotherhood. So from July 2013, when the current regime came to power, essentially in the form of a military coup, and later was elected and gained legitimacy through elections, the popularity of the regime declined significantly at this point. And some of the activists and some of the forces in Egypt who sided with the military at the beginning are not supporting the military now. In the future, well, basically on next Monday, the opening for the registration and candidacy for the parliamentary election will take place. Hopefully it will take place. And the regime failed actually to establish a unified list. The Sisi called on different political groups in Egypt to form a unified list to support his legitimacy. He failed. We don't have a unified list. What we have instead at this point is a case before the court challenging the constitutionality of the election laws, which basically means if the regime doesn't see, after seeing the performance of the court system, if the regime doesn't see its interest in an election, a parliamentary election, they might actually use that case before the court as a pretext to delay the elections in the future. But essentially, we have a new challenge in Egypt, and that's the challenge of ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula. And that actually might give the regime some sort of legitimacy in the sense that the regime is currently fighting ISIS in Sinai. And some people who might otherwise be against the regime might not be supporting the regime, might be supporting the regime on that ground at this point.
Right. And so what is to come of Egypt? What do you think is the next steps in terms of trying to restore the original hopes of the January 25th revolution?
I don't think there is a going back in the Arab world. We have a clash on all fronts at this point in the Middle East. Unfortunately, in some cases, it's very violent, like the case of Syria. Also in Egypt, sometimes it is very violent. We have the comeback of the Interior Ministry with its own Mubarak era tactics of torture and violations of every basic rule. But essentially, we have also other kinds of clashes. I mean, the idea of democratic transition that I talked about originally is part of the debate in the Arab world, part of the debate between the Arab intellectuals. So these things are in the open, and everybody is discussing these fundamental issues. The economic system in the Arab world is also a matter of debate. And there is no really popularity for whether people can actually characterize this as neoliberal policies or not. They understand and they feel that this system doesn't serve their interests, and actually it's impoverishing them. So these things are out there now, and it will be very difficult to imagine that the Arab people would actually submit. I think what's happening in Syria and what's happening in part of Egypt is actually might be pushing some people away from the idea of change and idea of revolution. But I think that will be temporary only. The new generation is different, and the idea of the socioeconomic demands will persist, and as long as they persist, we will see a push for that. Now, are we going to see the same scenes we've seen in the Tahrir Square in 2011? I doubt that we'll see something similar to that very soon. But as long as there is instability, everything is possible in the Arab world, especially in Egypt.
Professor Da'na, who is actually in control? We've seen all these transitions and different efforts to govern in Egypt, but who's really in control of what's happening in Egypt?
Well, the two most powerful forces in Egypt at this point, and I also think part of the dynamics at this point is that there might have been a tension before between them, but their interest is bringing them together, and that is the military and the security forces. During the Mubarak era, Mubarak's interest was not really in any external conflict, and therefore he empowered the security forces and the interior ministry, and his target and his goal was to maintain order inside Egypt. January 25th revolution actually weakened the security forces and empowered the military to some extent, and that actually what actually enabled the military to go forward with the coup on July 30th in 2013, because people actually did hate the interior ministry and the security forces, the police and the central security forces, as they are called. And now these are the two most important forces in Egypt that are actually have basically all the power. The military is busy, though, not only in Sinai, but in other areas in Egypt, fighting ISIS and fighting some terrorist groups and terrorist actions. And it's also one of the tools that is facing the Muslim Brotherhood.
Professor Da'na, let's talk about what has happened in terms of the counter-revolution in our next segment. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.